The morning sun peeked through the airport windows as 8-year-old Sophie clutched her small pink backpack. Her eyes wide with wonder darted around the busy terminal. This was her very first time flying, and everything from the rolling suitcases to the uniformed pilots made her heart race with excitement. "Dad, how much longer?" she asked, tugging at her father's worn navy hoodie. Despite being able to afford much more, Tom Chen preferred dressing casually. Jeans, comfortable sneakers, and his favorite old hoodie. As the newly appointed CEO of Skyline Airlines, he had specifically chosen to fly economy class today, wanting to experience the airline service just as regular passengers did before officially starting his position next week. "Just a few more minutes?" "Sweetheart," Tom replied, checking their boarding passes again. "They'll call our group soon." Sophie bounced on her toes, clutching her treasured stuffed rabbit. "Hoppy gets to sit by the window, okay?" Tom smiled, ruffling her dark hair. "Of course. You and Hoppy can watch the clouds together." When their boarding group was finally called, Sophie practically skipped down the jet bridge, counting the steps aloud until they reached the airplane door. A flight attendant with a tight smile greeted them with a rehearsed, "Welcome aboard." Her name tag read, Patricia. Tom guided Sophie to their seats in row 17, helping her buckle in by the window with Hoppy tucked safely beside her. The morning flight wasn't full, which meant they had their route to themselves. A small blessing when traveling with an excited child. "Look how tiny the people look from here," Sophie exclaimed, pressing her nose against the window as they taxied. "They're like my dollhouse people," Tom chuckled, settling in with his e-reader. "Wait until we're actually in the air. Everything will look even smaller." The takeoff thrilled Sophie. She gasped as the ground fell away, squeezing Hoppy tight against her chest. "Dad, we're flying." "We're really flying." "We sure are," Tom said, enjoying her excitement more than the flight itself. These moments were precious, just the two of them sharing an adventure. Since his wife had passed away 3 years ago, he'd made it his mission to create special memories with Sophie whenever possible. Once they reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign dinged off and the flight attendants began their service. Patricia pushed the beverage cart down the aisle, stopping at their row. "Something to drink?" she asked, her tone noticeably less warm than it had been for the business class passengers Tom had observed earlier. "Apple juice, please," Sophie replied politely, sitting up straight the way her father had taught her. "I'll take coffee. Black," Tom added. Patricia handed them their drinks with minimal eye contact, already turning toward the next row before Tom could thank her. Sophie carefully placed her juice on the tray table, determined to show how grown-up she could be. She'd been practicing using airplane manners with her dad for days. But as she reached for her activity book from her backpack, her elbow bumped the tray table. The plastic cup of apple juice tipped over, sending a stream of sticky liquid across the tray onto her leggings and a few drops onto the airplane carpet. "Oh no," Sophie gasped, her face falling. "I'm sorry, Dad." Tom immediately reached for the napkins Patricia had provided. "It's okay, sweetheart. Accidents happen. Let's clean this up." Before he could fully mop up the spill, Patricia returned, having noticed the commotion. Her face hardened as she looked at the small puddle on the floor. "Seriously?" She sighed loudly, making no effort to hide her annoyance. "This is exactly why we tell parents to watch their children on flights." Sophie's lower lip trembled at the sharp tone. Tom felt a flash of irritation but kept his voice level. "We're handling it. Do you have a few extra napkins we could use?" Patricia pulled out a small stack of napkins from her apron pocket and practically tossed them onto Tom's tray table. "Parents really should teach proper manners before bringing kids onto a plane. Other passengers shouldn't have to deal with messes and disruptions." Sophie's eyes welled with tears. She whispered, "I said sorry." Patricia either didn't hear or chose to ignore the little girl's apology. Instead, she looked pointedly at the damp carpet. "That's going to stain, you know. These planes don't clean themselves." Tom felt his jaw tighten but maintained his composure. As a business leader, he'd learned long ago that responding to rudeness with more rudeness never improved a situation. Instead, he focused on comforting Sophie. "It's just a small spill, honey. No big deal at all." He turned to Patricia, who was still hovering disapprovingly. "We've got it handled, thank you." "Well, I'll need to report the carpet damage," Patricia said, pulling out a small notepad. "What's your seat number again?" 17A and B, Tom replied calmly. "Though I'm not sure a few drops of apple juice constitutes damage." A passenger across the aisle, a grandmotherly woman with kind eyes, leaned over. "I have some wet wipes if you need them," she offered, giving Sophie a sympathetic smile. "That's very kind, thank you," Tom said, accepting the travel pack of wipes. Patricia pursed her lips, clearly unhappy that another passenger had intervened. "Just make sure she's more careful with the replacement drink," she said curtly. "Should I even bring another one, or will that end up on the floor too?" Sophie, mortified, shrank into her seat. "No, thank you," she whispered, eyes downcast. Tom felt a surge of protectiveness. "I think we're fine for now," he said to Patricia, his voice still controlled, but with a newfound edge that made the flight attendant blink in surprise. As Patricia moved on with her cart, Tom wiped Sophie's damp leggings with the wet wipes and helped her adjust her tray table. "Don't worry about her," he whispered. "Some people just forget what it's like to be 8 years old." "Am I being bad?" Sophie asked quietly, her usual confidence shattered. Tom's heart broke a little at the question. "Absolutely not. You're being a wonderful traveler. Accidents happen to everyone, even grown-ups." For the next 30 minutes, Sophie remained unusually quiet, clutching Hoppy and staring out the window. The joy of her first flight had dimmed considerably. Tom tried to interest her in the activity book they'd brought, but she only half-heartedly colored a page, frequently glancing toward the galley where Patricia was working. When Sophie finally whispered that she needed to use the restroom, Tom could see she was nervous about moving around the cabin. "It's okay, Soph, the bathroom's just a few rows back. Want me to walk with you?" She nodded, sliding past him into the aisle. Tom pointed out the vacant lavatory sign, and Sophie walked carefully toward it, one hand trailing along the seat tops for balance. Tom watched protectively as she made her way down the aisle, noting how she carefully avoided eye contact with Patricia, who was arranging snacks near the galley. While Sophie was in the bathroom, the fasten seatbelt sign suddenly illuminated with a ding. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Folks, we're hitting a bit of turbulence. Flight attendants, please take your seats, and passengers, please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." Tom immediately stood up, concerned about Sophie. Just then, the plane gave a small lurch and the bathroom door opened. Sophie stepped out, looking uncertain as the plane bounced again. "Come straight back, Sophie," Tom called, nice and slow. Sophie nodded, concentrating hard on walking steadily as the plane continued to experience minor turbulence. She was almost back to their row when a particularly strong bump caused her to stumble sideways, accidentally brushing against Patricia's arm as the flight attendant was hurrying to her jump seat. "Watch it," Patricia snapped, much louder than necessary. "This is exactly why children should stay seated during turbulence." Several passengers turned to look, and Sophie froze in the aisle, her face burning with embarrassment. "The seatbelt sign just came on," Tom pointed out, keeping his voice reasonable as he helped Sophie back to her seat. She was already returning from the restroom. Patricia stood in the aisle, hands on her hips. Well, if she can't walk properly on a plane, maybe she should just stay in her seat for the entire flight. "We can't have passengers falling into each other every time there's a little bump." Sophie quickly buckled her seatbelt, then turned her face toward the window, her small shoulders hunched. A tear slid down her cheek, which she hastily wiped away with her sleeve. Tom took a deep breath. Throughout his career, he'd dealt with difficult people, but seeing someone treat his daughter this way tested his patience like nothing else. Still, he knew making a scene wouldn't help matters, especially with Sophie already upset. "I understand safety is important," he said to Patricia, his voice quiet but firm. "But so is speaking to passengers, especially children, with respect." Patricia's eyebrows shot up, clearly not used to being challenged. "I'm just doing my job, sir. Safety is our priority. And customer service isn't?" Tom asked mildly. Patricia's lips thinned. "I'll be making note of this interaction," she said, turning away to take her jump seat as the turbulence continued. Tom turned his attention back to Sophie, who was still staring out the window. Her earlier excitement completely evaporated. He gently squeezed her hand. "You okay, kiddo?" She nodded without turning, but he could see her reflection in the window, eyes watery, bottom lip caught between her teeth. "Hey," he said softly, "remember what we always say about people who aren't kind?" Sophie turned slightly. "That they might be having the worst day of their life and we don't know their story," she recited quietly. "That's right. And what else? That how people treat us says more about them than about us," she finished, the ghost of a smile appearing. Exactly, Tom said, giving her hand another squeeze. So let's just enjoy our flight and not worry about anyone else, okay? Sophie nodded, leaning against his arm. Okay, Dad. Tom settled back in his seat, his mind already turning over the interaction. As the incoming CEO of Skyline Airlines, he had specifically chosen to fly as a regular passenger to experience the service firsthand. He'd expected to gather general impressions about efficiency and comfort. Instead, he'd received a much more valuable, if troubling, insight into how some of his staff treated their most vulnerable passengers. The turbulence soon passed, but Tom knew this matter wouldn't be forgotten. Not by Sophie, and certainly not by him. There would be changes at Skyline Airlines starting very soon. The flight leveled out after the turbulence passed. Sophie remained quiet, her earlier excitement about flying completely gone. She held Hoppy close to her chest, occasionally glancing toward the back of the plane where Patricia was now serving drinks to other passengers. Want to play tic-tac-toe? Tom asked, pulling a small notepad from his pocket. He was determined to salvage their trip despite the unpleasant encounter. Sophie nodded without much enthusiasm. Okay. As they played, Tom noticed Sophie's spirit slowly returning. Her competitive nature couldn't stay hidden for long, and by their fifth game she was fully engaged, strategizing aloud and celebrating her wins with quiet fist pumps. 3 in a row. I win again? She whispered, drawing a line through her O's. You're too good at this, Tom said, pretending to be devastated by another loss. I think you've been practicing behind my back, Sophie giggled, the sound warming Tom's heart after the tense morning. No, you just always put your ex in the same corner first. Do I really? I never noticed that, Tom said, genuinely surprised by her observation. Their game was interrupted when the plane hit another small pocket of turbulence. The captain's voice came over the intercom again. Folks, looks like we'll be experiencing some bumpy air for the next 20 minutes or so. Nothing to worry about, but I'm turning on the fasten seatbelt sign as a precaution. Sophie immediately checked that her seatbelt was secure, then looked at Tom with worried eyes. Is the plane okay? Absolutely, Tom reassured her. Turbulence is completely normal. It's like driving on a bumpy road instead of a smooth one. The plane is designed to handle it. She seemed satisfied with this explanation and returned to their game. The mild turbulence continued as promised, occasionally causing the drinks in the cup holders to slosh slightly. About 15 minutes later, Sophie whispered, "Dad, I'm thirsty." Tom pressed the call button above his seat. He waited patiently, knowing the flight attendants were likely busy during the turbulence. After a few minutes, a different flight attendant, a young man whose name tag read Lee, appeared. "How can I help you?" he asked pleasantly. "Could we get some water, please?" Tom requested, "Of course. I'll be right back." Lee returned quickly with 2 cups of water, handing them carefully to Tom. "The turbulence should clear up soon," he said with a friendly smile toward Sophie. "First time flying?" Sophie nodded shyly. "Well, you're doing great. Much better than some adults I've seen." Lee winked, and Sophie's face brightened at the compliment. After Lee left, Sophie sipped her water carefully, holding the cup with both hands. "He was nice," she observed. "Yes, he was," Tom agreed, thinking about the stark contrast between the 2 flight attendants. As someone who had built his career in customer service before moving up to executive positions, Tom understood that a company was only as good as its frontline workers. Lee represented the kind of employee who strengthened a brand, while Patricia, well, she was exactly the type who drove customers away. The turbulence gradually subsided, and the seatbelt sign dinged off. Sophie finished her water and placed the empty cup on her tray table. "Can I go to the bathroom again?" she asked. Tom checked his watch. "Sure, we still have about an hour before landing. Do you want me to walk with you?" "I can go by myself," Sophie said with newfound confidence. "I remember where it is." Tom watched proudly as she made her way carefully down the aisle. His daughter had always been resilient, bouncing back quickly from setbacks. It was a quality he hoped she'd never lose. While Sophie was in the bathroom, Tom noticed Patricia emerging from the galley with a cart of snacks. His stomach tightened at the thought of another interaction between her and Sophie. He considered getting up to walk Sophie back to their seats, but reminded himself that hovering wouldn't help her confidence. Sophie exited the bathroom just as Patricia began rolling the cart down the aisle. Tom watched tensely as his daughter navigated past a few passengers who were stretching their legs. The plane chose that moment to hit another small air pocket. Sophie wobbled but caught herself quickly, accidentally touching the arm of a seated passenger as she steadied herself. "Sorry," she said to the woman, who smiled kindly in return. "No problem at all, sweetie." Sophie continued toward their row, walking even more carefully now. She was almost there when Patricia, who was serving a passenger across from their seats, suddenly backed up without looking. The beverage cart shifted into Sophie's path, and despite her best efforts to avoid it, Sophie's hip bumped against the corner of the cart. The cart barely moved and nothing spilled, but Patricia whirled around as if someone had crashed into her service area deliberately. "For heaven's sake," she exclaimed, loud enough that several nearby passengers looked up. "This is exactly what I was talking about earlier. Children running around the cabin, disrupting service." Sophie froze, her eyes wide. "I didn't. You were walking too fast," Patricia cut her off. "This isn't a playground." Tom rose from his seat immediately. "She was walking perfectly fine. You moved your cart into her path without looking." Patricia's eyes narrowed at Tom. "Sir, we're trying to provide service to all passengers. Perhaps you could keep better track of your daughter so she's not constantly in the way." The unfairness of the accusation made Tom's face flush. Sophie hadn't done anything wrong, and they both knew it. He glanced around, noticing several passengers watching the exchange with uncomfortable expressions. A few were whispering to each other, clearly discussing Patricia's behavior. "My daughter was returning to her seat calmly and carefully," Tom said, keeping his voice level but firm. "She apologized for an accidental contact that caused no harm. Your response is completely out of proportion." Sophie slipped past Patricia and quickly sat down, looking mortified. She pulled Hoppy onto her lap and buried her face in the stuffed rabbit's ears. Patricia sniffed dismissively. "Well, we'll have to agree to disagree. Some parents just don't understand the challenges of managing a cabin full of passengers." A middle-aged woman sitting across the aisle leaned forward. "Excuse me, but I saw what happened, and the little girl did nothing wrong. You weren't looking where you were going." Patricia's face tightened. "I appreciate your input, ma'am, but I've been flying these routes for 15 years. I know how to manage cabin service." She turned back to Tom. "Would you like a snack, or should I continue serving other passengers?" "I think we're fine, thank you," Tom replied coolly. He sat down next to Sophie and put his arm around her shoulders. "You okay?" he whispered. Sophie nodded without looking up, but he could feel her small body trembling slightly. Patricia moved her cart forward, but not before saying in a voice just loud enough for them to hear, "Some people just shouldn't fly with children if they can't handle the responsibility." Tom felt a surge of anger that he carefully controlled. Getting into a shouting match with a flight attendant wouldn't help Sophie, and would only make the situation more uncomfortable for everyone. Instead, he took out his phone and opened the Notes app. "What are you doing?" Sophie asked, finally looking up from Hoppy. "I'm making a note of what happened," Tom explained. "When something isn't right, it's important to document it accurately while it's fresh in your mind." Sophie watched as he typed the details of both incidents with Patricia, including the time and flight number. "Are you going to tell on her?" Tom smiled slightly at Sophie's phrasing. "I'm going to provide feedback about our experience, yes. Companies can only improve if they know what's not working well." A thought seemed to occur to Sophie. "Is this like when you're starting your new job? Will you make things better for kids on planes?" Tom nodded, touched by her perception. At 8 years old, Sophie already understood the connection between leadership and responsibility. "That's exactly right. Sometimes we have experiences that help us understand problems we might not have noticed otherwise." The flight attendant named Lee passed by their row and noticed Sophie's downcast expression. He paused. "Everything okay here?" Before Tom could answer, Sophie spoke up. "The lady with the cart was mean to me again." Lee's professional smile faltered momentarily. "I'm sorry to hear that. Would you like me to bring you anything? Maybe some cookies might help." Sophie brightened a little. "Yes, please." As Lee went to fetch the cookies, Tom noticed Patricia watching from the galley, her expression sour. Clearly, she didn't appreciate her colleague's intervention. Lee returned with a small package of cookies and a paper airplane he'd folded from a napkin. "Here you go," he said, handing both to Sophie. "And this is a special pilot certificate for being brave during turbulence." He'd written excellent flying skills on the wing of the paper airplane. Sophie's face lit up. "Thank you." As Lee continued down the aisle, Patricia approached their row again. She seemed unable to let the matter drop. "I see my colleague is encouraging disruptions," she remarked coldly. Tom had finally had enough. "May I have your full name, please?" Patricia blinked, caught off guard by the direct request. "Excuse me?" "Your full name," Tom repeated calmly. "For my feedback report." "Patricia Winters," she replied, lifting her chin defiantly. "Badge number 45872. And you're welcome to report whatever you like. I've worked for this airline for 15 years without a single complaint sticking." Tom nodded, adding the information to his notes. "Thank you." Patricia's confidence seemed to waver slightly at his calm reaction. Most passengers who threatened to complain did so emotionally, making it easy to dismiss them as troublemakers. Tom's methodical approach clearly unnerved her. "Well, I'll be including my own report about your daughter's behavior," she said, though with less conviction. "Running in the aisles, spilling drinks, bumping into service carts, it all creates safety hazards." Sophie looked up, a spark of indignation finally breaking through her embarrassment. "I wasn't running," she said quietly but clearly. "And I said sorry for the accident." Patricia opened her mouth to respond, but the captain's voice interrupted over the intercom. "Flight attendants, please prepare for landing." With a last disapproving glance at Sophie, Patricia returned to the galley. Tom gave Sophie's shoulder a squeeze. "I'm proud of you for speaking up." The corners of Sophie's mouth turned up slightly. She wasn't telling the truth. "That's right. And you stood up for yourself politely and clearly. That takes courage." As the plane began its descent, Sophie pressed her face against the window, watching the ground slowly come closer. The excitement she'd shown during takeoff was muted now, but Tom was relieved to see her interest returning. "Everything looks like toys from up here," she observed. "It does," Tom agreed. "It's a good reminder that sometimes we need to look at the big picture to get perspective on our problems." Sophie considered this thoughtfully. "You mean like how the mean flight attendant seems less important when you can see the whole world?" Tom smiled at her wisdom. "Exactly like that." The plane landed smoothly and the familiar chime indicated they could unfasten their seatbelts. As passengers began gathering their belongings, Tom noticed Sophie watching Patricia, who was stationed by the exit, saying goodbye to deplaning passengers. "Will you tell her boss about how she acted?" Sophie asked. Tom took out his phone again, checking the time. "Yes," he said simply, "but not in the way she's expecting." Sophie looked confused, but Tom just smiled. "Let's get our bags, shall we? Grandma and Grandpa are waiting for us at the airport." As they stood to exit, Tom noticed several nearby passengers giving Sophie encouraging smiles. The older woman who had spoken up earlier even gave her a thumbs up. It was a small reminder that for every unkind person like Patricia, there were many more who recognized unfairness and cared enough to show support. The passengers slowly filed toward the front of the plane, the aisle clogged with people retrieving bags and jackets from the overhead bins. Sophie stood quietly beside their seats, Hoppy tucked under one arm and her small backpack hanging from her shoulders. She kept glancing nervously toward the exit where Patricia stood saying goodbye to departing passengers. "Dad?" Sophie whispered, tugging at Tom's sleeve. "I don't want to walk past her." Tom understood his daughter's anxiety. "We can wait until most people are off if you'd like." Sophie nodded gratefully. They stepped back to allow other passengers to move ahead of them. The kind older woman who had spoken up earlier paused as she passed. "Your daughter behaved beautifully," she told Tom. "Some people just shouldn't work with the public." She smiled at Sophie. "Don't let one grumpy person ruin your day, sweetie." "You're doing just fine," Sophie offered a shy smile in return. "Thank you." As the crowd thinned, Tom noticed Lee, the friendly flight attendant, approaching from the back of the plane. "Everything okay here?" he asked. Usually folks are rushing to get off, not hanging back. Tom appreciated the man's perceptiveness. "Sophie's a bit nervous about passing by your colleague." Understanding dawned on Lee's face. "Ah, I see." He knelt down to Sophie's level. "Would you like me to walk with you?" "I'm heading that way anyway." Sophie looked up at Tom, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, please," she said quietly. "Great. I could use the company," Lee said cheerfully, standing up again. "Ready when you are." Tom gathered their carry-on bag from the overhead compartment, and they joined Lee in the nearly empty aisle. As they walked toward the exit, Tom noticed Patricia's expression harden when she spotted them. "Thank you for flying with Skyline Airlines," she said mechanically as they approached. her eyes deliberately avoiding Sophie. Lee positioned himself slightly between Patricia and Sophie as they passed. "I'm heading out now too, Patricia. Have a good layover." Patricia barely acknowledged him, already looking past them to the last few passengers still gathering their belongings. Once they were in the jet bridge, Sophie visibly relaxed. "Thank you for walking with us," she said to Lee. "My pleasure," he replied with a genuine smile. "Where are you two headed after this?" "We're visiting Sophie's grandparents," Tom explained. "They live about an hour from here." "Wonderful. I hope you have a great visit," Lee said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of plastic wings, the kind airlines sometimes give to children. "Here, these are for you, Sophie. For completing your first flight." Sophie's eyes widened as she accepted the gift. "Thank you. You're very welcome. And thank you both for flying with us today." Lee gave a small bow and headed toward the crew exit. As they walked through the terminal, Sophie proudly pinned the wings to her backpack. Lee was so nice, she observed. "Why couldn't Patricia be more like him?" "That's a good question," Tom replied thoughtfully. "People choose how they treat others. Sometimes people forget that their job isn't just about tasks, it's about making others feel valued." They stopped at a coffee shop in the terminal so Tom could get a drink and Sophie could use the restroom. While waiting for their order, Tom checked his phone and found several messages from colleagues at Skyline Airlines, confirming Monday's leadership meeting, his first official day as CEO. Sophie returned from the restroom just as the barista called their order. "Can we call Grandma and Grandpa to tell them we landed?" she asked, sipping her hot chocolate. "Good idea," Tom agreed, pulling up the contact on his phone. Sophie happily chatted with her grandparents, describing the takeoff and the clouds, carefully omitting any mention of Patricia. Tom smiled at his daughter's resilience, focusing on the positive aspects of her experience rather than dwelling on the negative. After finishing their drinks, they made their way to the baggage claim area. While waiting for their luggage, Tom noticed Patricia and several other flight crew members entering the terminal. He instinctively stepped slightly in front of Sophie, shielding her from view, but Patricia walked past without seeing them, engrossed in conversation with another flight attendant. "Dad," Sophie said, tugging his sleeve again and pointing. "Isn't that our bag?" Tom spotted their navy suitcase circling on the conveyor belt and quickly retrieved it. "Good eye, kiddo." As they headed toward the exit, Tom's phone rang. He checked the screen and saw it was Diane, the head of operations at Skyline Airlines. "Hello, Diane," he answered. "Tom, how was your flight? Did you get good insights?" Tom glanced down at Sophie, who was adjusting the wings on her backpack. "Very illuminating, actually. I experienced some interesting customer service." There was a pause on the other end. "That doesn't sound good. Anything we need to address immediately?" "Yes, I think there is. I'd like to meet with you and the customer experience team first thing Monday morning." "Of course. I'll set it up," Diane replied. "Is there anything specific you can share now?" Tom watched as Sophie wandered a few steps away to look at a display of local souvenirs. "Let's just say I witnessed firsthand how some of our most vulnerable passengers are treated when staff don't think anyone important is watching." Diane sighed. "That bad, huh?" "Unfortunately, yes. But it's actually helpful to see these issues before officially starting. It gives me a clearer picture of what needs to change." "Always the optimist," Diane chuckled. "That's why we hired you." "All right, I'll arrange that meeting for Monday at 9 a.m. Will that work?" "Perfect. We'll have plenty to discuss." After ending the call, Tom rejoined Sophie at the souvenir stand. "See anything you like?" She pointed to a small snow globe with a miniature airplane inside. "Can we get this for my room? To remember my first flight?" Tom smiled, taking the snow globe to the cashier. Despite Patricia's behavior, Sophie wasn't letting it ruin her memory of this milestone. Outside the terminal, they found their prearranged car service driver holding a sign with Chen written on it. The driver, a friendly man named Carl, helped them with their luggage, and soon they were on the highway headed toward Sophie's grandparents' house. Sophie dozed off in the back seat, the events of the day having worn her out. Tom used the quiet time to jot down more detailed notes about the flight experience, particularly the contrast between Lee and Patricia's approaches to customer service. One treated passengers, even young ones, with respect and kindness. The other seemed to view them as inconveniences to be tolerated. This was exactly why Tom had insisted on experiencing the airline as a regular customer before stepping into his role as CEO. Too often, executives lost touch with the day-to-day realities of their businesses, especially how frontline staff interacted with customers. The car pulled into the driveway of a charming two-story house with a wraparound porch. Sophie stirred as they came to a stop. "Are we there?" she asked sleepily. "Yes, we're at Grandma and Grandpa's," Tom confirmed, gathering their belongings as Carl unloaded the trunk. The front door opened before they reached it, and Sophie's grandparents, Lily and Howard, rushed out to greet them. Sophie ran into her grandmother's open arms while Howard clapped Tom on the back. "How was the flight?" Lily asked as they moved inside. "It was okay," Sophie said with a small shrug. "The takeoff was really fun and I got these wings." She pointed proudly to the plastic pins on her backpack. Tom caught his in-laws' questioning looks over Sophie's head, but gave a slight shake of his head, indicating they'd talk later. After helping Sophie settle into the guest room she always used on their visits, Tom joined Lily and Howard in the kitchen while Sophie played in the backyard. "All right, what happened?" Lily asked, pouring Tom a cup of coffee. Sophie wasn't her usual bubbly self when talking about the flight. Tom sighed, recounting the interactions with Patricia. By the time he finished, both Lily and Howard looked upset. "That's outrageous," Howard said, shaking his head. "Did you report her?" "Not yet, but I will," Tom replied. "Actually, this gives me a chance to address larger issues within the airline's culture." Lily raised an eyebrow. "Are you going to use your new position to get her fired?" Tom shook his head. "That's not my style, and you know it. One employee behaving poorly is usually a symptom of deeper problems. Training gaps, leadership issues, misaligned incentives. Firing Patricia wouldn't solve those underlying issues." Howard nodded thoughtfully. "So what will you do?" "First, understand why someone like Patricia has been allowed to treat passengers that way for 15 years, according to her. Then implement changes to prevent it from happening in the future." Tom sipped his coffee. "I'm more interested in fixing the system than punishing individuals." "That's why you'll make a great CEO," Lily said warmly. "You see the bigger picture." Their conversation was interrupted by Sophie running in from the backyard, her earlier fatigue apparently forgotten. "Grandpa, the treehouse needs a new ladder. Can we fix it tomorrow?" Howard laughed. "Absolutely. I've got all the supplies ready in the garage." Sophie beamed, then turned to Tom. "Dad, can I call Mom to tell her about our flight?" A shadow of sadness passed over Tom's face. It had been 3 years since May's death, but Sophie still sometimes talked as if her mother was just away on a trip. The therapist had assured Tom this was normal, Sophie's way of keeping her mother present in her life. "How about we look at her picture instead, and you can tell me what you think she'd say about your adventure?" Tom suggested gently. Sophie considered this, then nodded. "Okay, she would probably say I was brave." "She definitely would," Tom agreed, pulling Sophie into a hug. "She'd be so proud of how you handled today." Later that evening, after Sophie had gone to bed, Tom sat on the porch with his laptop, drafting notes for Monday's meeting. He wasn't just thinking about Patricia anymore, but about Lee as well, how to recognize and reward employees who embodied the values the airline should stand for. His phone buzzed with a text from Diane. "Customer experience team confirmed for Monday 9 a.m. Anything else you need?" Tom thought for a moment, then replied, "Yes, please invite Flight Attendant Lee Wilson from today's Flight 237 to join us. And I'd like Patricia Winters to be there as well." A moment later, Diane responded, "Interesting request. Consider it done." Tom set his phone aside, looking up at the starry sky. Monday was going to be interesting, not just for him and the airline, but especially for Patricia Winters. The weekend passed quickly at Sophie's grandparents' house. They built a new ladder for the treehouse, baked cookies, and visited the local park. By Sunday evening, Sophie was chattering happily about all the fun she'd had, the unpleasant flight experience seemingly forgotten. Tom, however, hadn't forgotten. As he packed their bags for the return trip home, they'd be taking the train this time, his mind kept returning to Patricia's behavior and what it represented about the airline's culture. Tomorrow would be his first official day as CEO, and addressing this issue would be his top priority. "All packed, Dad," Sophie announced, dragging her small suitcase into the hallway. "Grandma put extra cookies in my backpack for the train ride," Tom smiled. "That was thoughtful of her." "Did you thank her?" "Yup, and I gave her an extra big hug, too." After saying goodbye to Lily and Howard, they boarded the afternoon train. Sophie was delighted by the dining car and spent much of the journey pressing her face against the window, watching the scenery roll by. The peaceful journey gave Tom time to finalize his thoughts for tomorrow's meeting. Monday morning arrived with a steady rain. Tom dropped Sophie off at school, giving her an extra hug at the entrance. "Have a great day, sweetie. Remember, I'll be picking you up a little late because of my first day at the new job." "That's okay," Sophie replied, adjusting her raincoat hood. "I'll wait in the library. Good luck with your big meeting." Tom waved as she skipped into the school building, then drove to Skyline Airlines headquarters. The modern glass building gleamed despite the gloomy weather. He took a deep breath before entering, mentally switching from weekend dad to new CEO mode. The receptionist did a double take when Tom approached the front desk. He was wearing a well-tailored suit now, not the casual hoodie and jeans from the flight. "Mr. Chen, welcome," she exclaimed, quickly standing. "Ms. Rodriguez is expecting you." "I'll let her know you're here." Diane Rodriguez, the chief operations officer, appeared moments later. "Tom, great to have you officially on board." She shook his hand warmly, then lowered her voice. "I've arranged that meeting as requested. Everyone's waiting in the main conference room, including those 2 flight attendants." Tom nodded. "Perfect. Has anyone told them why they're here?" "No," Diane replied with a slight smile. "Just that their presence was requested by the new CEO." "Good. And the customer experience team?" "All there, with the data you requested on passenger complaints." They walked through the headquarters, employees glancing curiously at Tom as they passed. News of the new CEO's arrival had clearly spread. When they reached the conference room, Diane paused before opening the door. "Just so you know, Patricia Winters has quite a reputation among the staff. Been here 15 years. Never been successfully disciplined despite numerous passenger complaints. She has family connections to one of the former board members." "Interesting," Tom said thoughtfully. "That explains a few things." When they entered the conference room, about a dozen people were seated around the large oval table. Tom immediately spotted Lee, looking slightly nervous in the formal setting, and Patricia, whose expression was a mixture of boredom and irritation. Diane cleared her throat. "Good morning, everyone. I'd like to introduce Tom Chen, our new CEO." All eyes turned to Tom. Patricia's bored expression suddenly froze, her eyes widening in shock as recognition dawned. She had last seen him in casual clothes, but there was no mistaking his face. "Thank you, Diane," Tom said calmly, taking his place at the head of the table. "Before we begin, I'd like to share a story about my flight with Skyline Airlines this past Friday." Patricia's face paled visibly as Tom recounted the events of the flight, keeping his tone professional and matter-of-fact. He didn't name her directly, but everyone in the room knew who he was talking about. Lee looked down at his hands, clearly uncomfortable with the situation despite having been the good flight attendant in the story. "So that's why I asked to meet with all of you today," Tom concluded, "because what happened on that flight represents both the worst and the best of customer service, and it gives us an opportunity to address some fundamental issues in our company culture." The customer experience team members exchanged glances. One of them, a woman named Phoebe, spoke up. "Mr. Chen, I'm sorry about your experience. Unfortunately, it's not an isolated incident. Our passenger complaint data shows a consistent pattern." She distributed several charts showing complaint categories. "As you can see, rude or dismissive staff is our #1 complaint, followed by inconsistent service experience at a close second." Tom nodded, studying the data. "And what's been done to address these issues?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Finally, the head of human resources, a man named Jack, cleared his throat. "Honestly, not enough. We've implemented various training programs, but without clear consequences for repeated violations, they've had limited effect." "I see," Tom said, turning to face Patricia directly for the first time. "Ms. Winters, would you like to share your perspective on what happened during Friday's flight?" Every head in the room turned toward Patricia, whose face had regained some color, now flushed with embarrassment or anger. "It was hard to tell which, she began, then stopped, clearly thrown off balance. "I was simply trying to maintain order and safety on the flight." "By berating an 8-year-old child for an accidental juice spill?" Tom asked quietly. Patricia's eyes dropped to the table. "I may have been a bit harsh," she admitted reluctantly. But my job is stressful, and when parents don't control their children. My daughter was extremely well behaved. Tom interrupted, his voice still calm, but with an edge of steel now. She walked carefully, spoke politely, and apologized for accidents that weren't entirely her fault. Yet you chose to humiliate her repeatedly. Lee shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Tom turned to him with a warmer expression. Mr. Wilson, your interaction with my daughter made a positive impression. You showed kindness and professionalism. Thank you for that. Lee nodded, clearly relieved. I was just doing my job, sir. That's exactly my point, Tom said, addressing the entire room now. Both of you were just doing your job, but with completely different interpretations of what that job entails. He turned to the customer service team. And this is where we've failed as an organization, by not clearly defining and enforcing our service standards. The room was silent as everyone absorbed his words. Patricia stared down at her hands, her earlier defiance completely gone. Now, Tom continued, I could fire Ms. Winters for her behavior. Patricia's head snapped up, fear evident in her eyes. But that wouldn't solve the underlying problem, would it? We'd just be treating a symptom rather than the disease. Diane leaned forward. What do you propose instead? Tom stood up and walked to the whiteboard at the end of the room. A complete overhaul of our customer experience approach. New training protocols, clear consequences for violations, and most importantly, rewards for employees who exemplify our values. He wrote several bullet points on the board, outlining his vision. As he spoke, the tension in the room gradually shifted to energy and engagement. Even Patricia began taking notes, her expression thoughtful rather than defensive. Ms. Winters, Tom said, turning to face her again, you have 15 years of experience with this airline. That's valuable, but your approach to customer service, particularly regarding children and families, needs to change dramatically. Patricia nodded slowly. I understand, sir. Good, because I'm giving you a choice. Tom's words hung in the air for a moment. You can either join our new customer experience team as an advisor, helping us identify and fix the issues that lead to poor service, or you can accept a severance package and find employment elsewhere. Murmurs rippled around the table. This wasn't the punitive approach many had expected. An advisor? Patricia repeated, clearly confused. Yes. Sometimes the people who've been part of the problem have the best insights into how to fix it. You know this airline inside and out, but this offer comes with conditions, including a sincere apology to my daughter and a commitment to our new service standards. Patricia was silent for a long moment, looking around at her colleagues. Finally, she straightened in her chair. I would like to stay and help improve things, sir, and I would like to apologize to your daughter. My behavior was unprofessional. Tom nodded, neither smiling nor frowning. We'll arrange that. Now, Mr. Wilson, he turned to Lee, I'd like to offer you a promotion to our training team. Your natural approach to customer service, especially with our younger passengers, is exactly what we need to model. Lee's eyes widened in surprise. Thank you, sir. I'd be honored. For the rest of the meeting, they discussed specific changes to implement immediately. By the time they wrapped up 2 hours later, there was a palpable sense of purpose in the room. As everyone gathered their materials to leave, Tom addressed them one final time. What happened on that flight was unfortunate, but it's given us a clear direction. Skyline Airlines will now be known for consistent, respectful service to all our passengers, regardless of their age or the price of their ticket. After the meeting, Patricia approached Tom hesitantly. Mr. Chen, I'm truly sorry about how I treated your daughter. There's no excuse for it. You're right, there isn't, Tom agreed. But genuine change begins with acknowledging mistakes. You'll have the opportunity to demonstrate that change in your new role. As Patricia left, Diane stayed behind, shaking her head in amazement. That was masterful, Tom. You turned what could have been a simple termination into a catalyst for company-wide improvement. Tom gathered his notes, thinking about what he would tell Sophie when he picked her up from school later. Sometimes the worst experiences give us the best opportunities to make things better, he said. That's a lesson I want my daughter to learn. As they walked out of the conference room, employees in the hallway looked at Tom with new respect and curiosity. Word of the meeting had already spread throughout headquarters. By the way, Diane said with a smile, the board is already impressed with your approach, taking a real flight as a regular customer before starting. None of our previous CEOs ever thought to do that. Tom smiled slightly. Let's see if they're still impressed in 6 months when all these changes impact the budget. They will be when customer satisfaction scores improve, Diane replied confidently. And speaking of budgets, we need to discuss the new training program costs. Tom nodded, his mind momentarily going to Sophie. He wondered what she would think of today's events, how the flight attendant who had made her feel so small would now be helping to create a better experience for other children. He hoped it would show her that speaking up about unfairness could lead to positive change, and that even difficult experiences could become valuable lessons. 6 months passed quickly. The rainy spring gave way to a warm summer, and now autumn leaves were beginning to fall as Sophie started 3rd grade. Tom settled into his role as CEO of Skyline Airlines, working long hours but always making sure to be home in time for dinner with Sophie most nights. Dad, can I wear my wings pin to career day tomorrow? Sophie asked one evening as they cleared the dinner table together. Tom smiled. The plastic wings that Lee had given her had become one of her prized possessions. Of course. Are you excited about your presentation? Uh-huh. Sophie nodded, carefully placing plates in the dishwasher. I'm going to tell everyone about how airlines work and how you make sure everybody has a good trip. That sounds perfect, Tom said, ruffling her hair affectionately. Later that night, after Sophie was in bed, Tom reviewed the latest customer satisfaction reports. The changes they'd implemented were showing results. Complaint numbers down by nearly 40%, positive feedback up by over 50%. The training program that Lee now helped run was being praised throughout the industry. And Patricia? To everyone's surprise, especially Tom's, she had thrown herself into her new advisory role with unexpected dedication. After a shaky start, she had become one of their most valuable team members, with a knack for identifying problems before they became serious issues. The next morning, Tom dropped Sophie at school for career day before heading to the airport. Skyline was launching a new family-friendly service initiative, and he wanted to be there in person. Good morning, Mr. Chen. The airline staff greeted him as he walked through the terminal to the designated gate. Lee was there, now sporting the gold stripes of a customer experience trainer on his uniform. Morning, sir. Everything's ready for the launch. The first families are already checking in. Excellent, Tom replied, watching as a young couple with twins in a double stroller approached the special family check-in lane. The staff member greeted them warmly, kneeling down to speak directly to the children while helping the parents with their boarding passes. The new family seating policy is already getting positive feedback, Lee informed him. And the pre-boarding play area has been a huge hit. Tom nodded approvingly. The play area, a simple but effective space near the gate where children could burn off energy before boarding, had been Patricia's suggestion, surprisingly enough. Speaking of Patricia, Tom spotted her across the terminal, clipboard in hand, observing the family check-in process and taking notes. Her transformation over the past 6 months had been remarkable. After their first awkward weeks working together, she had gradually opened up about the personal struggles that had affected her work attitude, a difficult divorce, caring for her elderly mother, financial stress. None of it excused her behavior toward Sophie, but it helped explain it. Mr. Chen, Patricia said, approaching him with her usual efficient manner. The new family welcome kits are being very well received. She handed him her clipboard, showing photos of children opening the small backpacks containing activity books, healthy snacks, and child-sized headphones. Good to hear, Tom replied. Any issues so far? Just one. We need more staff trained for the family lanes during peak hours. I've already spoken with scheduling about adjustments for next week. Tom nodded. Make it happen. And Patricia, how are the preparations coming for next month's school outreach program? For the first time that morning, Patricia's professional demeanor softened into a genuine smile. The school program had been her idea, bringing airline staff to local schools to teach children about air travel, answer questions, and help ease anxiety for first-time flyers. Everything's on track. We've got 15 schools scheduled so far, and the hands-on activities are ready for testing. Excellent, Tom said. Sophie's school is on the list, right? Yes, sir. October 15th, Patricia hesitated, then continued more quietly. I've asked to be part of that team specifically. If that's all right with you. Tom studied her face, seeing genuine hope there. I think that would be appropriate. Sophie's been curious about your work with the airline. Patricia's eyes widened slightly. She has? Tom nodded. She asks about the lady from the plane sometimes. She's a forgiving child, more curious than resentful. She sounds like a remarkable little girl, Patricia said softly. She is, Tom agreed simply. Their conversation was interrupted by an announcement that the inaugural family-friendly flight was beginning to board. Tom and Patricia moved to the gate area to observe. The new boarding process was a stark contrast to the typical rushed and stressful experience. Families were welcomed by name, children received special attention, and boarding was staggered to prevent congestion in the aisles. The flight attendants, all graduates of Lee's new training program, greeted each child at eye level, making them feel important rather than in the way. Tom watched with satisfaction as a little boy around Sophie's age was escorted to his seat by a patient flight attendant who showed him how to operate the entertainment system. This was exactly the experience he had envisioned when he took over as CEO, treating all passengers, regardless of age or ticket class, with genuine respect and care. After the flight departed, Tom headed to his office for meetings. Around mid-afternoon, his assistant interrupted a budget discussion. Sorry for the interruption, Mr. Chen, but there's a special delivery for you. Tom looked up, puzzled, as his assistant placed a small package on his desk. What's this? It's from the customer experience team. Patricia Winters dropped it off personally. Intrigued, Tom opened the package to find a child-sized sky blue envelope addressed to Sophie in careful handwriting. Alongside it was a note from Patricia. Mr. Chen, it read. I've written a personal apology to Sophie as I promised 6 months ago. I wanted to give you the chance to read it first and decide whether it's appropriate to give to her. The enclosed pin is the first of our new Young Travelers Respect Program badges, a program I've helped develop based on what I learned from my interaction with your daughter. Thank you for the second chance. Tom carefully opened the envelope addressed to Sophie and read the letter inside. It was simple, sincere, and age-appropriate, acknowledging the hurt caused without making excuses, and explaining how Sophie had helped change how the airline treats children. The small enamel pin enclosed was beautifully designed, featuring a child with wings and the words "Respected Traveler" along the bottom. He placed both letters back in the package, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. The Patricia who wrote this thoughtful letter seemed worlds away from the bitter flight attendant who had made Sophie feel so small. That evening after dinner, Tom handed Sophie the blue envelope. This came for you today, from someone at my work. Sophie's eyes lit up with curiosity as she carefully opened the envelope. Her expression grew serious as she read the letter, her lips moving silently with the words. When she finished, she looked up at Tom. This is from the mean flight attendant, she said, not as a question but a statement. Yes, Tom confirmed. Patricia has been working with me to make flying better for kids. She wanted to say sorry for how she treated you. Sophie studied the pin, turning it over in her small fingers. She made this program because of me? She helped create it, yes. Your experience showed all of us that things needed to change. Sophie was quiet for a moment, processing this information with the thoughtful seriousness that sometimes made her seem older than her years. So something good came from something bad? Tom nodded, impressed by her insight. That's exactly right. Sometimes the most important changes happen because someone is brave enough to point out what's wrong. Like how you didn't just get mad at her, but made her help fix things instead. Like that, Tom agreed, once again struck by his daughter's perceptiveness. Sophie pinned the badge next to her plastic wings on her backpack. Can I write her back? The request surprised Tom. If you'd like to. What would you say? Sophie considered the question seriously. I'd say thank you for saying sorry, and that I'm glad she's helping other kids have better flights now. And maybe, she hesitated, maybe I could help with her school program when she comes to my class. Tom felt a rush of pride at his daughter's generosity of spirit. I think that's a wonderful idea. I'll let her know. The next day, Tom delivered Sophie's neatly handwritten note to Patricia. Her hands trembled slightly as she read it, and Tom was surprised to see tears in her eyes when she looked up. She wants to help with the school program? Patricia asked, her voice unsteady. She does, Tom confirmed. She's quite excited about it, actually. Patricia shook her head in wonder. After how I treated her. She's willing to work with me? Children often have a capacity for forgiveness that we adults could learn from, Tom said. Sophie sees that you're trying to make things better. That matters to her. 1 month later, Sophie stood proudly at the front of her classroom, wearing both her plastic wings and her respected traveler pin as she introduced Patricia and the airline team to her classmates. Any lingering awkwardness between them had faded during their preparation meetings, replaced by a genuine rapport. As Patricia led the children through an activity demonstrating how planes stay in the air, Tom watched from the back of the classroom. He thought about the chain of events that had brought them here, from that unpleasant encounter at 30,000 feet to this moment of education and reconciliation. On the bulletin board behind Sophie's class hung a poster the children had made, featuring paper airplanes and the words, "Respect takes us higher." It was, Tom thought, a perfect summary of what they'd all learned. One small incident on a routine flight had cascaded into positive changes affecting thousands of travelers. Sophie caught his eye across the classroom and gave him a thumbs up, her face glowing with confidence as she helped a younger child with the paper airplane in his hands. Tom returned the gesture, his heart full. Sometimes the most important lessons came from unexpected teachers, even flight attendants who belittled little girls, and little girls who found the courage to forgive.